Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we take a look at the impact of esports. We welcome you to engage with your fellow attendees, both in the chat and also the one-to-one meetings. Please visit the registrant directory for more information. We always invite you to follow the social conversation at #sportico.live during and post the event. Let's kick things off with a great conversation about maximizing audience growth in esports, moderated by Rick Burton, the Professor of Sports Management at Syracuse University.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Rick Burton. I'm the David B. Falk Professor of Sport Management at Syracuse University. I'm a pretty regular contributor to Sportico, and I teach an esports class at Syracuse, which should, for many of you, mean that I really don't know as much about what I'm talking about as I ideally would. But I've got three great panelists that are with me today, and I think that the discussion we're going to have against the title of Maximizing Audience Growth is really going to be an exciting one. I'm going to start with Rishi Chadha, Global Head of Gaming Content and Partnerships for Twitter, Arnold Herr, the Chief Operating Officer for Gen G, and Johanna Ferris, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Call of Duty Activision Blizzard. Panelists, great to have you here with us. And I know the three of you know each other, and I'm kind of the outlier who hasn't been to the parties that you guys have gone to. But Johanna, let me ask you first, this topic, which is kind of vague, maximizing audience growth, is an interesting one for me because some of the people watching don't know a lot about esports. They know it's a phenomena. They know it's all around them. They know they should know more. And then there are people on this Zoom or on this session that really know the business pretty closely. So when I say, how do we think about holistically maximizing audience growth for esports, where do you go with that question?
It's a huge question. It's a question we ask ourselves a lot, certainly in partnership with Arnold and with Rishi in different ways. So we each probably come at it from a different angle, but it's the network effect of what I often draw parallels to with underground movements that have been in existence for many decades that have now achieved massive scale, but haven't really converted to mainstream. What we're seeing with esports is we're at the inflection point where now with each passing month, even you start to see more and more mainstream platform partners, media platforms, different brand sponsors, different venues being designed for an esports type of opportunity. That was not the case even when I joined Activision Blizzard 3 years ago. I mean, so there's this rapid transition moment that we each are in and sort of witnessing. I think the way we think about audience aggregation is not dissimilar in many ways to how you might think about how do you galvanize a digital first audience to watch anything, frankly. But what's interesting about this consumer base is that they're coming with a very ingrained and entrenched attachment to gameplay. And to think of them not now only as individual players in an ecosystem, but now as attenders of live competition events or viewers, the way we would think about ratings when I used to work at the NFL, is just a new headspace. Not only it's an opportunity to drive ancillary revenue for publishers like ourselves at Activision Blizzard, which is why we were big believers and big investors in esports as a business, a standalone business that can one day be profitable. But you also think about, well, where do you find those audiences and how do you speak to them in new ways that extend their interaction with our IP as maybe now a spectator consumer? Of course, some of them have the aspiration of going pro, but they know that that's few and far between. So the mass audience appeal is really about the cross-section of the right media platforms, the right ways to speak to this next-gen consumer, and the right way to think about aspiration funnels such that they are very interested in the opportunity to be a fan of a team, of a pro athlete. It just so happens that they're doing it in a gaming IP infrastructure. But there's not much more different that I would say. It's just the math equation of how long will that marathon take for all of us to really see it go mainstream in a big way.
You mentioned your time at the NFL, and I think maybe it would help the viewers if each of you would maybe do a couple of seconds on your background. So let me start with you, Johanna, and then we'll go to Arnold and Rishi last. So just quick, how would you introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Yes, I started as a sports executive at the NFL. I spent 12 years there, and then I made the jump into esports. And a lot of the reason was for what I sort of said in the first question. There's this opportunity to now apply the approaches, the business models, the engagement models, the fan development models that we were seeing and building and amplifying in traditional sports to gaming communities. And I love Call of Duty. I always have. And now that I really occupy the chair of overseeing the franchise, esports is but one part of a much bigger whole when we talk about Call of Duty engagement, but it's just been such a joy to take what I learned in traditional sports and now serve as a full-time gaming executive.
Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the president of Genji Esports. We're an esports organization. Got teams all around the world in Los Angeles, Shanghai, and Seoul. I'm calling in from Seoul right now. Just really quick background on myself. I don't come from a gaming background. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My first job out of school was actually at Goldman Sachs during the mortgage crisis, during the mortgage-backed securities trading desk. Did that for a few years. Moved over to consulting with the Boston Consulting Group. Got the startup itch. Did a startup of my own. Went in like $300,000 of debt. That didn't work out. So I fell in love with tech though. So I joined Google. Worked at Google for a few years. Did another startup. And then, long story short, when I was at Google, I was one of the only business guys that was actually playing in all of these League of Legends tournaments that were happening with all the engineers. So I got like a weird reputation as like, who the heck is this kid? That's how I actually got found. And, one thing led to another. And I joined Genji Esports when we were starting out of a conference room in the middle of San Francisco. So that's kind of my background in brief. And I'm super excited to be here, especially with Johanna and Rishi.
Thanks so much. Rishi, how about something from you?
Of course. So I've been in the gaming and esports space for over 12 years now. I've had the pleasure of working on a variety of different facets in the space, whether it's early stage sponsorships with the likes of Activision Blizzard, to going over to the early days of the multi-channel networks with Machinima. So pioneering the idea of putting up gameplay content on YouTube and making a living from it. Then going over to the live video space at MLG, Major League Gaming, which is acquired by Activision. And from there, moving into the mobile game space at Mob Crush. Now I've been at Twitter for about 4.5 years now. And I have the pleasure of working with both Johanna and Arnold and really all of the publishers in the space as far as how they can grow their audiences and engage them in a meaningful and innovative way, but also how they're actually able to build a business on Twitter too. So really thinking about revenue, reach, and innovation and trying to be at the forefront of a lot of the things Johanna was talking about when it came to how do we push this forward? How do we get more mainstream appeal when it comes to esports, but then also how do we get brands to monetize and how do they get them to invest in it too? Because I think one of the things that I wanted to call out was just there's a crazy stat about the fact that traditional sports fans are being monetized at almost, and in esports, let me take it back and rephrase it. Esports fans are being monetized at such a small fraction of what a traditional sports fan is monetized at. And I think that's like, when you're talking about just the money, that's the opportunity there. The pie is incredibly small right now for esports. And so we really got to be thinking about how we can continue to make it bigger. And I really do believe like Twitter is a great partner for making that happen.
So Arnold, Johanna mentioned the inflection point, and anybody who's gone to business school loves that phrase. What do you think has caused us to come to the inflection point circa, let's call it 2021, 2022? What are your thoughts kind of on what's going on right now? Because there's a famous moment in NFL history with because Johanna worked at the NFL, where Vince Lombardi looks out on the field, the Green Bay Packers are playing, and the famous line is he goes, what the hell is going on out there? So I'm going to ask you that question. If we're at an inflection point, what the hell is going on?
I think the inflection point and what's really exciting about this, and I agree, like I remember when we were first starting our organization, I couldn't even get a meeting with a local Korean sportswear brand, right? And when I finally got the meeting after many connections and many introductions, they offered me like 20 jerseys for free as a sponsor, right? And now we're working with multi-million-dollar deals, Puma, Giving them a shout out, is our global partner for all our merch, and we get stuff designed by amazing streetwear designers like Heron Preston. Like, the world has changed very quickly in the last 4 or 5 years. I attribute that a lot. And I think a lot of people have very like elaborate theories, but mine's a lot more simple, right? If you look at the bigger wave of gaming and how much it has grown, there basically isn't anybody that doesn't play games, right? Versus when I was playing games when I was, much younger. It was not something that everybody did, right? And it's no longer a term it's almost like saying, hey, are you a TV viewer? Right? That nobody says, oh, I'm a viewer, right? So that's kind of where we've gone as a total industry. And more importantly, in terms of like what's changed now and what's going on with the PR, what's going on with the partnerships, is that finally the people that were like really native to gaming is now actually taking jobs, usually at the senior manager, director level. So they're actually becoming decision makers at a lot of these organizations, right? And what I saw as a cycle that was really exciting was, there was all this PR buzz around gaming and esports because they needed a topic du jour to talk about. And of course, all the C-level folks was said, all right, I have no idea what this is. My kid plays these games, but hey, go assign somebody to go figure this out and make it big, right? And when they looked around, and for the first time, there was somebody that they respected in the organization that actually was, really understood this. Like, for instance, in Korea, we noticed one person was a huge StarCraft fan when he was growing up, right? And he was now the director of a big, consumer brand. Another person in LA, their kid just absolutely adored Fortnite, right? And, played that every day, so knew something was up. So I think that's the change that happened, was that the meta trend of gaming becoming is bigger than TV, right, for the average kid. Then the actual more micro trend of the decision makers, once the C-level people rung the bell, were actually in the company and in the organization, and that allowed kind of this like change that happened. Then after that, the early movers basically have a FOMO effect on the remainder that are sitting behind, and I think that's kind of where the industry has moved forward. And I would just add one more point. I agree with Rishi. I agree with Johanna. The actual business model of esports still sucks, right? Like, it's one of the worst business models I've ever seen. I think I can say that, given that I'm an esports team. So I would say the awareness, the potential has grown leaps and bounds, versus the business model is still stuck 5 years where I saw it last 5 years ago. A lot more work needs to be done. It is one of the worst business models that you could ever study in the business world. But I do think the potential is there, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, Rishi,
I think,
go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to also say, one of the things that contributes to Arnold's point about the business model not being mature is we've actually seen a significant like hyper growth in the past 2 years because everyone was stuck at home and there was no live events. And so what's interesting, and I think a really important call out when it comes to esports, is that esports started in a digital format. So people were always watching a live stream of competitive events. The live components started to come afterwards, right? Whereas with traditional sports, the live events were a big component and then people were watching digitally. And so when the pandemic hit, esports was essentially built for the pandemic to make a quick pivot, and they were doing live, digital events. Like Johanna's team was doing things for the Call of Duty League or the Overwatch League. And then because of that, that's all people could watch is esports content. So there was this new shift in viewership that was increasing because of that. And then you also saw a spike in a lot of traditional sports athletes now started to talk about their fandom and their favorite, the favorite games they're playing. I don't know how many times I heard about NBA athletes missing practice because they were playing Warzone. And so just having those moments happening and all of that really pushed a lot of the growth in terms of viewership and fandom that I think the business is catching up to a little bit now because it grew just so fast. I mean, even for us, looking at the conversation around esports, we saw a 70% increase year over year in the esports conversation. And we actually saw almost like 90% increase in the overall gaming conversation last year. So just seeing those big spikes really is attributed to what's happening in the world and the fact that, we were all stuck at home a bit longer.
And Rishi, you've got a little bit of a background relative to social media. What role is Twitter playing or Twitch, any of these social media platforms in really expanding everyone's awareness?
Yeah. When it comes to Twitter, what I always like to say is no matter what the video game is or where that video game is broadcast, people are coming to Twitter to talk about it. We are that home of the gaming and esports conversation, and it's very much a second screen experience. So someone could be watching their favorite Overwatch tournament or a Call of Duty League match on YouTube, and they'll have Twitter open, and that's where they're sharing clips and highlights, and they're talking about the excitement of the match. And that's where there's a real conversation happening with their friends. So it's very much that backbone of a place where people can use to connect with their fans. So as an esports team for Arnold, they're using it as a place to connect with their fans, share information and updates, and also a place for driving conversation around all of the things that they're doing while happening that could be happening elsewhere. So it's very much a complementary platform to many of the other platforms out there. And then I think taking a step back and taking the Twitter hat off, we also see that there's been significant viewership trends when it comes to platforms like Twitch and YouTube, and even Facebook with their Facebook gaming initiative. And so we're now seeing just overall games being streamed, is the increase in viewership is continuing to happen, much to what we were talking about earlier when it came to people being at home and now watching their favorite streamers or events. They're using all of these different platforms to do that. And so we're starting to see increased consumption in both live content as well as VOD content as well.
And I want to bring you back in terms of having been at the NFL, whether or not the league is worried about what esports might do to its future generation of fans. And we know that they played around with skins in Fortnite very briefly. I think they were in, then got out, then got in again. But how should the big sports leagues, the NBA has really pushed, I think, well afield with 2K. The NFL always had Madden, or has had Madden for a long time. But should the big pro sports leagues be worried about esports cannibalizing some of their viewer base?
It's almost a yes and no, right? I think it's more about acknowledging, as the points have already been raised, it's not just that that's the next gen consumer preference in many ways, and that it's very, very difficult now to assume that somebody under the age of even 25 is sitting down for appointment broadcast television events. Thank goodness for live sports. It's really the one that has in many ways stood the test of time, but is still seeing, declines, not surprisingly, given just the competition on OTT platforms and what have you. But it's an opportunity, and not just because, what digital platform integration can do to not only make the live sport event experience coincide with these, growing industries like gaming and esports, but the actual player bases in the NFL and in the NHL, MLS, you name it, FIFA, certainly the NBA, they're all, to Rishi's point, playing Call of Duty, and it's just organic to who they are. It's an extension of their identity to do that. You will see countless A-list pro athletes in a Warzone lobby hanging out when they're not, on the field. And that's not just an opportunity for Call of Duty, that's an opportunity for the likes of the NFL or the likes of the NBA to really embrace that and figure out new ways to have conversations that appeal to that, next gen fan who may actually interact with an NBA star through the medium of Fortnite or League of Legends or Call of Duty, and pull them in through a new channel or a new way to excite and, sort of frankly delight them. We actually saw a good example of this to some degree recently, even on Monday Night Football, where we saw ESPN, broadcasting a highlight of Stefan Diggs designing cleats for a cause that's near and dear to him, which was the Call of Duty endowment mission. And it was really to celebrate his passion for COD through the medium of his football cleats. It was, aired in traditional broadcast medium, but drove real social impact for veterans and helping veterans in his community find high-paying jobs. That's a win for everybody, right? And so those are the ways that I think we can start to bridge these as net positives, where it's just another form of conversation and fan development and cross promotion that can have great impact, where all ships really rise together as part of that partnership.
Arnold, you're in Seoul, and we just had the League of Legends World Championship. You've got a team. Put some numbers around how big some of your players are becoming, or how big the the viewership is for the world's biggest events. I think for some of the people who don't track closely with esports, I just love to have you take it down to the granular level and say, hey, with Gen G, this is the kind of stuff we're seeing.
Yeah, sure. I think. So I think, sorry about that. So I think what's really exciting, and I'll try to take two views on this. I always like to kind of go with the headline, but kind of show you like what's going on the ground. So like the headline is, esports is bigger than traditional sports at the major events, right? You got like hundreds of millions of viewers for every like major championship of the top esports. Our players are basically celebrities in Los Angeles. Whenever they're walking around, they're getting stopped all the time. And in Seoul, especially, they've got like subway stops where fans have actually like bought out signs for them just to kind of express their fandom. We've got security patrolling all of our facilities, especially in Seoul, just because of all the fans that come through. But I thought like that's kind of the stuff that like you can kind of read on every headline. But I think a more interesting fact is, well, to the point that Johanna's making about how big this opportunity is and how there's a lot of opportunity that people aren't even realizing. So one thing that's happening is that in Seoul, we've actually created an entire school just for gaming. So we have kids coming in where they learn to learn how to play games in the morning, and they're learning like math and English and everything in the afternoon, and they're getting a U.S. high school degree so that they can go try to become a pro while not giving up trying to get a high school degree. Or of course you have those kids that come in after school and their parents pay to get them trained in the proper system with our coaches, our software, everything else, just to get them better at games, because it's such an important part of their very being. Just the same way that maybe you and I played basketball, you probably, given that you're in the sports business, played better than I did, versus I got cut from the varsity team. But I would say that's what's really exciting. And just to kind of give you an idea, we started this thing less than a year ago, right? And a lot of folks have said, oh, you guys are trying to do like the IMG thing where you can like really come in and give them the training at the top level. By next year, we're going to be 10 times bigger than IMG in terms of the number of students that we serve. So we've got this massive opportunity of growing and creating and integrating the culture of sports in interesting ways, where we've studied what IMG is doing and we said, wait, why does everybody have to go to the middle of Florida near the swamp? Even though the facility is freaking amazing, by the way. But like, why does that barrier exist, and why does it cost so much to go there? Growing up, I never saw that. I was a kid growing up in the middle of downtown LA. Like I never knew there was even these things that you could go to. But I think that's what's really interesting, is that the opportunity is so big that it's not just about the top line viewership numbers. There's actually these real interesting opportunities where you can be kind of that first step to help a lot of parents, to help the industry kind of figure out, hey, how can we actually embrace the total competitive community? Just like Johanna said, like the very top of the pros that are making millions of dollars now, those will be the stories on ESPN and these things talking about, oh, this guy's making $5 million a year, right? I think the top League of Legends player makes like $7 million a year. Right. But I mean, that's interesting and it's cool, but there's a lot more interesting stories if you dig a little bit deeper. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity as well. So that's kind of my spiel on kind of the macro picture versus what's really going on the ground floor as well.
Rishi, I was going to say that in having a topic like maximizing audience growth, one of the things I suppose someone out there is worried about is whether esports is going to grow too fast. Which is somewhat unimaginable, but I think maybe one of the questions here is, is there risk inside this phenomenal growth that anyone has got to be paying attention to, or is it, if we're at the inflection point, still kind of a Wild West, buyer beware, everybody go for broke? Your thoughts on that?
I would say that we're in a much better place than if you go back to even just looking at the early 2000s and some of the things that were happening with Counter-Strike at that time, and some of the deals that were happening when it came to just broadcasting Counter-Strike content on DirecTV. And just even looking at that, I feel like that was the buyer beware period when it tried to grow way too fast. And I think we've all learned from those moments now and have really thought about, and this actually kind of goes back into Arnold's point too, of we're actually now as an industry spending a lot of time building out the infrastructure And now there's actually, you've got the headline stories of the pro players, but actually there's also great headline stories about people that can make a living doing esports. So like you can go to school now. And I mean, I remember I went to college and I was originally going to be a doctor. And then I got my ass kicked by OChem and physics. And I realized I'm not going to be a doctor. And I came out during the Great Recession, didn't know what was going to happen. And then I jumped into gaming and my parents were like, you're an idiot. But and as soon as I got the job at Twitter, they finally realized, okay, this is legit. This makes sense. And so I think we're in a really unique place now where every kid could actually say, you know what, I actually want to get a job in esports and I want to do something. And it doesn't mean I have to be a pro player. So the point I'm trying to make is really that now there's real jobs and infrastructure in place, whether it's being in sales, working in marketing, working, as an esports doctor or a psychiatrist, even a chef for teams. Like there's so many things that are now happening that are very legitimate, that there's a proper infrastructure for people to actually feel like if they get into esports, if they get into the industry, there's so many different entry points for them now that it's not a buyer beware situation where it's snake oil and tomorrow it's all going to disappear, because it's very real. And, Johanna comes from the NFL and is experiencing it from both sides of traditional sports and esports. It's become more real than ever.
Yeah, I would, if I can, just build on that point, because I think Rishi is so correct on so many of his points. And to be short about it, I would just say, I've even witnessed that in the last, let's call it 3-4 years that I've made the jump, the sophistication of the skill sets that are coming into this industry is only a net positive. So while back to Arnold's point, a lot of the focus, rightly so, for those of us who have businesses to run, are about profitability and revenue generation and, how quickly can these things turn a profit? Yes, we need to figure that out, and it's not easy to do. But the heavy hitters from across the board, from operational know-how, financial know-how, marketing, everything in between, legal, corporate finance, investor relations, I could go on and on and on, things that you would not typically attach to gaming and esports based on the entertainment product that consumers usually hear about or talk about. That's where the sophistication, to me, is really edifying, because I think that work that isn't as sexy, but it is about infrastructure, it is about maturity, it is about sophistication and thought leadership. Over the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a completely different stage, not only of growth, but of stabilization, I'd argue, at scale for this industry. And it's very exciting to be a part of that.
That's such a great answer. And Arnold, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I think, what both of you guys are saying, in terms of the sophistication and the infrastructure, like actually as part of, owning and operating a team, I spent a lot of time studying, what the sports industry does, right? Like I actually looked at IMG and I was blown away by what IMG provided, not just the sports curriculum, but kind of the like total athlete curriculum. And they had it really figured out. Like they genuinely cared not about just like, what does the athlete do and et cetera. And you only read about, oh, this guy's a 5-star recruit versus a 4-star recruit. And I think about when are they going to come to the Lakers? But the reality is that it takes a hell of a lot of infrastructure and the right coaching and the coaching of the coaches to be able to create this, right? And whether it's physical wellness, mental wellness, just how you coach and how to be a good role model. These were all things that when I actually looked at and partnered looking at IMG, I was blown away by how much stuff you learn being an athlete, right? And that's why a lot of these guys come so prepared. And of course there are cases where people don't come prepared. And that's the other part about esports that I think needs a lot of work, is that if I looked at the IMG system versus I looked at our current esports infrastructure system, which is a bunch of dudes literally in a bedroom and just kind of figuring it out, I just saw this massive gap. And that's another great area where there's a ton of opportunity, right? So whether you're a sports psychologist or trying to study to be one, or even a physical training and these kind of things, there's really interesting things that I think cross over. And I think a good way to think about it, and this is one pitch that we gave even to one of our sponsors that makes desks for office workers, was, hey, if you think about esports athletes, in a way, they have a lot of the same problems that office workers do, whether it's like turtling of the neck, wrist problems. So almost like they're like the extreme sports version of the office worker. But it's the same way that I think a lot of the problems they face on mental wellness, physical wellness, right? I think there are interesting opportunities for the traditional sports world and that industry that's built around that infrastructure could actually start crossing over. And I think that's what's, that's what really got my, a lot of spark coming in and inspiration coming from when I looked and studied at IMG.
So we're down to a couple of minutes left. And what I wanted to do was give each of the three of you a chance maybe to either kind of sum us up or cover what we've missed. But I want to steer it back around to our title, this maximizing audience growth, and maybe our position on the return on investment. So Rishi, I'll start with you, but it's a chance, I think, for each of the three of you to maybe sell some of the viewers on the fact that the ROI is going to be pretty significant in this space in the coming years. And that, esports is obviously a growth stock, but it's also maybe a great time to get in and get in because the ROI should be really strong. So Rishi, what have we missed, or what do you want to make sure you leave us with here in these last few minutes?
Yeah, for me, I think one of the most important things as we look towards the continuing growth of the esports ecosystem and the gaming ecosystem at large is I really, really want to see more people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds looking at this industry as a place that they could get involved in and build a career in. I think like I said before, like my parents were scared for me to do this, but I think now it can be a very viable and successful career path. And so what I hope is I want to see more talent I want to see more talented youth get involved in the esports industry at large and not looking at it just to be pro players, but to be people that can provide a real meaningful impact to the business at large. And I think that's a huge opportunity and a huge growth area. And that's what I want to see continue to grow. And I think in the next 5 years, we'll see a lot of that happen.
Right. Johanna.
I would say back to audience growth, because I've just witnessed it in all these different ways, is exposure. I've seen people, I was one of these people a couple of years ago, but I've literally witnessed people go from 0 to 60 in being able to understand the space and yearn for more and become a fan literally within hours because they walked into a live esports arena and understood it the way that a typical fan might walk into a traditional sports arena or a traditional live concert. And we've lacked some of that. We've been handicapped by 2 years of a pandemic, which makes it even harder to take on world-class live operations, and they are expensive, but they are critically important to galvanizing more of an understanding in mainstream fan development conversations. It's really when you see it, it's really when you engage with the product and the community on the ground in real time that you start to understand it. And not only do you start to understand it, you start to just be completely blown away by, to Arnold's point, the potential, the vectors of opportunity that start to sort of spring off of that experience. So I'm really hungry for not just the broadcast ability to aggregate audience. We're going to continue to do that well. And just as Rishi said, that's sort of in our DNA to do well, even in light of a pandemic. But when we can combine the two and really start to bring people to the live experience, I think we're going to see some major fan adoption. And I'm really thrilled by that opportunity.
Love the answer. Vector speed. It's one of the best speeds you can have, right? So Arnold, you get to sum us up, and then I'll do some kind of a wrap up. But if I don't say it at the end to the panel, thank you so much for being with us and taking the time from really all over the world to be a part of this Sportico event. But Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, I wish, especially for folks that are just learning about the esports space, I would really highly recommend that you come with an open mind. And kind of the opportunity being really interesting. And I'll kind of close it out on my side with a couple stories. So we've been working, for instance, with a school district where there's a lot of at-risk youth, right? And the whole idea is none of these kids probably will go pro. But the idea is, hey, how can we work with these kids at a very young age that love gaming so that they actually have something at school that they actually care about, where they actually want to show up to class? Because at the end of the day, there's this little cool after school thing where they get to start learning how to play games, start engaging with each other, building really cool stuff in Minecraft. Like how do we actually start entering and creating that space? And, we've gotten tons of stories of kids basically saying, yeah, that's the only fun thing that I like about school. And I think that's really great. And the same in our school that we talked about, we had a father-son night. And it was shocking, especially this Korean dad, who's very much like my Korean dad, where he basically was, he asked him like, hey, what made you come to this thing? Like, you don't really seem like the type to like be really engaged in this stuff. And like, he had the best quote that I've ever heard. And I always love this quote. He said, honestly, I usually only have 5 words to say to my kid. Today, I feel like I have 20. And I was like, that's the quote, and I think that's where the opportunity lies. It's tremendous. If we just come with an open mind, I think we can open up a lot more doors. And I think that's one area that I would say, are we moving too fast? I think part of esports moved a little bit too fast and kind of tunnel visioned on how do we become a traditional sport and go into the Olympics and all of this stuff. But, if we come with an open mind about what this business could be instead of like what it should be, I think that's kind of where a lot more opportunities could open up, and I'm super excited about that.
Well, I tell my students at Syracuse that Ready Player One was set in like 2042, which was only like 20 years from now. And whether or not you buy into the oasis or you buy into how fast artificial intelligence and virtual reality will move, the three of you are at the cutting edge. You're at the forefront of what's going on, and I just think it's a fabulous time to be in this space. And on behalf of everybody at Sportico, I just want to thank you very much for being involved tonight and offering such great insights. And I hope our paths cross again really soon. So thank you to everyone for watching. And we'll turn you back over now to your mainstream hosts.
Fresh off New York City Football Club's first MLS title, I'm joined by City Football Group's Gavin Johnson, who serves as media director for the Holden Company. Gavin, how are you?
Really well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a superb weekend for the group, and we're all very proud of what the guys did over in Portland. So yeah, no, I'm a good form, as good as it gets. Thank you. But good to meet you, Eric.
Yeah, how was that moment for you?
It was great. It was, a journey. It's a very short journey for New York City FC. And this season, it's been a challenge for everyone on any sporting pitch. But the guys have just performed and they've delivered when the pressure's been on. They just stepped up and what they did, to go ahead. Then the disappointment of the injury time equaliser, but then to hold the nerve once they got to the penalty shootout and win, it was amazing. So the celebrations have been pretty epic, but unfortunately I couldn't be there. But no, we're really proud of all the work the guys have managed to do, and the success is well deserved.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thanks just for taking the time, Gavin, and looking forward to the discussion today. And because it's interesting, because from my perspective, City Football Group is embracing gaming more than a lot of properties right in the space, and with Man City right having its own full-on esports division. Tell me, Gavin, why are traditional sports franchises and their parent companies making these heavy investments into esports?
Yeah, so I think we were one of the first to get involved into esports, and it was the reasons are pretty obvious when you sort of reflect back on it now. For us as a football club, or soccer as obviously you call it over in the US, part of my job is to make sure our fans are enjoying our content, feel connected to the club, but also part of my job is to find new fans as well. And so when we're particularly talking about the younger ages, we do a lot of analysis of data in terms of how they're spending their time, what their interests are. So for example, I think it's just over 50% of young kids currently play football games on consoles or such as FIFA. So that straight away tells us a little bit of information in terms of where they're spending their time. And the other thing is, particularly outside of the UK, because if you're born in the UK, you choose your team usually on who your parents support or maybe what city you're from. But outside of the UK, it's a lot more arbitrary in terms of how people choose their team. And so what we found was from the data that there's big influence in certain markets in terms of what teams people are playing on games like FIFA, and that influences what team they might support in the future. And then the third thing is that gaming in terms of its popularity is not as popular as football across the globe, but it's ranking pretty high. So those are sort of three reasons straight away where we've got to show up in this space. And then you start to look at the broadcast numbers of people watching esports, They're, again, not the same scale as football, but they're pretty close behind, and they're accelerating. So we felt it was a space that we should show up in. But us as a club, when we go into something, we do it properly. So the investment that we've put in place, the team that we've now got in place, and we're starting to have success on the pitch as well. So it's not something that we hurtled into. It's a very strategic choice, but it's going pretty well at the moment.
Yeah, Gavin, what correlation do you see with soccer fans? Especially in esports. I believe I saw a data point that was saying soccer fans are more welcoming to esports than maybe any other fan. As far as sports go.
Yeah, we don't really sort of break it out versus other sports or so, because I care about soccer fans and football fans. But there's a lot of excitement, particularly in the younger audiences that we're obviously looking to reach, and they really connect with our guys. We have a whole roster of different players now representing Man City, representing New York, and what we see is that they really connect with them because they sort of see themselves in them. So I'll be picking two of our Man City FIFA players. We've got Brian, we've got Shells, superb guys, extraordinarily talented at what they do, but also their personality. When we choose people to work with us, we're looking for skills on the physically being able to play the game, but we also look at their personalities, how they kind of connect to people, and we find that it really drives a connection to those individuals, and therefore the club that I'm responsible for in terms of connecting to the fans.
Right. I know when you look at just the athletes, Gavin, how vital is it for them, the athletes who are gamers, to become influencers in the space, to push esports, right, more and more mainstream? I know obviously Sergio Aguero for you guys was, pretty big, on the Man City side. How important is that?
Yeah, so Sergio, obviously, he left us after, he's one of the legends of the club, and he really loved his gaming and just really lent into it. But we're very fortunate that a lot of the guys in the current setup are really passionate at games as well. So Kyle Walker is, Aymeric Laporte is, Kevin De Bruyne is. And the interesting dynamic, Eric, is where I see, these global superstars like Kevin De Bruyne. There is no better midfielder in the world of football, right? He is absolutely top of his game. But we pair him with like one of the guys from FaceTime, for example, and Kevin De Bruyne was like in awe because he can see the skill that these guys have as well. And I'm like, yeah, but you're Kevin De Bruyne. It doesn't matter. They see the ability that some of these guys have. So it's a nice, interesting dynamic where you get these absolute top draw professional athletes right at the top of the game who we idolize on the football pitch. Actually, they also idolize these guys as well. So when we ask them to say, look, do you want to play a bit of Fortnite on Thursday night with one of these guys, and we'll stream it? And they're like, yeah, okay, can I? Is that okay with you? I'm like, yeah, this is fine. So we're kind of pushing at an open door, and that and that also opens up different commercial partnerships that we can exploit as well, because many of our commercial partners across the group as well want to be in this space as well, and it makes it an attractive proposition for them too.
Yeah, I know you just mentioned, the corporate partners. Last year, I think it was last year, right? We saw some Man City players rocking the FaZe Clan gear. Do you kind of expect this crossover to be the norm in the future? Not just with your clubs, but NBA, MLS, other popular leagues around the world.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. We have a really mutually beneficial relationship with FaZe. That these guys are obviously growing incredibly quickly, really credible in this space, and that it comes back to us. For us, we've got to be credible, therefore we've got to do the right things, and that crossover makes it really, really interesting. So, for example, we did a good look video at the weekend for the guys as they headed to Portland, and Nate Hill was one of the guys that obviously, he's a big City fan, big New York City fan as well, and so he wanted to send a good look message, and that was one of the videos that we created around it. So yeah, I see big crossover with these sports stars, and it's interesting, as I say, it's been hard because of COVID, but when they get to meet them, there's like a bit of an aura about it, and they connect to them because they can see how hard these guys have worked, and there's a mutual respect between them.
Right. I mean, how much do you just think that line between traditional sports and esports, that line will continue to blur, 5 years now, from 10 years, down the road? Is it VR? What other avenues do you kind of predict?
Yeah, I think it's, it's hard to predict that far ahead. But I think the gaming space is moving quickly. We've as a club, like, you wouldn't be surprised to hear FIFA is the kind of the dominant game that we obviously do. We've got an amazing partnership with EA, and again, mutually beneficial relationship with EA as well. And that takes the vast majority of our time and investment and resource going into that. But also, we started to experiment into different games as well. So for the first time, we've hired a Fortnite player. And so that, I think, the reason I say that just shows the demonstrations that we will continue to experiment where we see opportunities. And if that is in gaming in the metaverse going forward, then we'll go into that space when we think the opportunity is right. But also, we won't just dive into it. We'll try and do it in an incredible way, make sure we've got the resource behind it, as we did with, Aiden, or Threats as he's known, when he joined us in the as our first Fortnite player. We need to know that we've got the infrastructure around Aiden to make sure that he can be as successful as he possibly can be. And again, he's got off to a brilliant start, and he's a terrific guy as well. So he fits the mold in terms of that, reaching the younger audiences. He's an absolutely superb skills in what he's got, but also he's a great guy as well.
I know you mentioned infrastructure, right? A lot of money's being spent here, right? Not just on infrastructure, but payroll, housing. How do you quantify that in return on investment? Is it about kind of being in the red now, and is it a more long-term play? How do you look at it from that aspect?
I mean, we invest a lot into it, so it's not just about the players. I think probably about 3 or 4 years ago, there might have been, you could say there's like maybe 6 or 7 people working on esports, including the players, at Manchester City or CFG. Today, there'll be north of 25. So if you look at the whole thing, and that includes, because what I'm trying to do is put a structure around the players, whether it's tactical knowledge, whether it's mental, whether it's advice on sleep, whether it's advice on nutrition, advice on physical, exercise that they do. So the whole structure needs to be around it. And every time we add someone in, we've got to make sure that structure's around as well. So what we try to do, Pep Guardiola on the pitch, he has an amazing team around him, giving 360 support to Kevin De Bruyne, for example. We try not to have the same scale, but the same principles, and we do exactly the same thing. But in terms of, it takes investment, but equally, we've got a lot of commercial partners who want to be in the space as well. And they see it as an opportunity to reach certain audiences. They see it as an opportunity to have that reflected glory back to them. And so we work really closely with commercial partners who want to invest into this space, be on the journey with us. So it's an investment, but it's also something that we go into with a bit of business acumen in terms of how we want to get a return from it. But ultimately, it's about reaching fans. It's about engaging with our current fans. Giving my 10-year-old son, making sure that he connects, as an example, with the club via this route that he's spending a lot of time gaming. But also, if it can also grow the fan base as well over a long time, because as I said at the top, there is big connection between how if you show up in this space, they're more likely to be maybe turn into a Manchester City fan or a New York fan or a Melbourne fan, or whoever we want to take on the journey to.
I know. Is there a correlation? Does this potentially drive ticket sales and merchandise on the other end, or is these totally separate business models? Do they feed into each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's harder to get that absolute correlation all the way down and track every single ticket buy, and we'd never want to go through that. This is about, and also if you start just with that, oh my God, 16 people bought a ticket this week, it's too granular. We're trying to think bigger and more strategic than that, in terms of, okay, we're going to be really strong in the space, we're going to do it right, we're going to hire the right players, we're going to give them the right backing, we're going to give them the right support, and we think that will influence fans. There's certain amounts of leaps of faith to get there. And also, even if they were connected to the club, is it only because of this? So you've got to be careful on attribution sometimes, but we're thinking a bit more upper funnel than just the lower funnel. It's how to answer that.
But yeah, as far as short-term revenue streams, right? How similar are they to the traditional ones for the clubs? Like merchandise, I know you guys, merchandise is big, right?
Yeah, so again, we've got our kind of replica kit partner is Puma. And again, they're a dream to work with. Puma are very progressive as a business, and we're like, a couple of years ago, right? Look, okay, we're investing into esports. So like, hey, can we? And they're like, hey, can we make a bespoke kind of esports shirt? And we're like, great, okay. So we launched our first one last year. It sold out within weeks. We then launched our second one back in September. Again, the sales on that have gone really strong, and we'll do the same thing next year. So that's one example. We also do a lot of collaborations with FaceTime as well. So we do different merch drops at different points around, different things that we're launching, and we've got more plans for that going into the new year. Hopefully we get to do it, physical kind of product drops as well, as opposed to just, doing through e-commerce. But it's a space. But again, I don't, that's just giving fans what they want. I don't see that as a huge revenue generator. This is about, there is a real appetite. You've got the kind of kudos of FaZe, you've got the kudos of Manchester City as a brand. Bring the two together. People want to buy the goods, but it's not. I wouldn't strike it as a massive revenue driver. It's more about giving fans what they want.
Right, like you said, it's big picture, right? Ultimately.
Exactly.
Right, and how far can you push the boundaries, right, in traditional sports, through this product, right, without taking away from it, right? Like, how do you make sure it's a complement and not competition, from the on-field product to?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't. I see the two things as separately. For example, City have got a massive game tomorrow night. We play Leeds in the Premier League tomorrow night, and the whole focus is on that. Whereas, maybe on Thursday we'd be doing an esports event around it. So that the two things can live side by side without it being any distraction away from it. So for example, Ryan or Shells, who are our FIFA players, that's their whole focus. Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden, all these guys on the pitch, that's their focus. But at the right time, we can give opportunities to do cool stuff. Whether again, streaming and playing Fortnite on for different events, we can do that. So I don't see too much of a challenge there, to be honest with you, Eric. I think the two can sort of mutually kind of work together and not be a distraction for either.
Well, Gavin, I think that wraps us up. I appreciate your time and thank you for coming on, and congrats again on getting that title.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. It's good to meet you, and all the best for everyone. Thanks, Eric.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the crossover of traditional sports and esports session. My name is Eric Jackson, sports business reporter at Sportico. I'll be joined by some of the decision makers who work together to bring competitive gaming and sports as we know it. We have Shannon Gross, social media strategist for the Dallas Cowboys, Kim Miali, NFL agent and general counsel for Rock Nation Sports, Eli Reinfeld, president of Paradigm Sports Management, and we have Justin Kenna, CEO of Game Square Esports. Thank you all for coming on. There's been this wave of esports properties and organizations becoming more visible and active in the space. Previously reserved, right, for sports teams and their partners themselves. I just kind of want to start off with the big why, guys. Why are traditional sports franchises and leagues making this, making these hefty investments, right, in these partnerships into esports and gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I can kick off if you want, and then probably throw it over to Shannon. I think Shannon's probably lived this experience the most with Jerry Jones, obviously investing in this space. Jerry being pretty early on investing into complexity gaming a number of years ago. I think nearly 4 years ago now. I mean, it's kind of the Wayne Gretzky quote in terms of don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where it's going. I mean, if you look at the growth over the past few years, it speaks for itself. 81% of Gen Zers play video games, 77% of millennials do. Gaming as a whole is the fastest growing entertainment industry in the world, and esports is a part of that. So esports is obviously the professional competitive part of that. And I think if you just look at these huge audience numbers alone, Yuzu actually came out with some numbers that 13 to 39-year-olds, there's 20% of those that watch competitive sports every week. And that's just a small part of this overall industry. But of that 20%, 32% actually prefer to watch esports over traditional sports. So that is in a really powerful sort of demographic and market. So I think it's really about being able to look at ways to integrate the two and engage your audience in the space. But I'll throw it over to Shannon because he's sort of firsthand lived this.
Yeah, I think there's just some natural synergies with esports and traditional sports, and it's a new generation that's I think we all gamed growing up, but now that you've got competitive gaming, we all wish when we were growing up there was competitive gaming, because we might have taken different career paths along the way, right? But now it's a legitimate sport, and I think the way that traditional sports teams are looking at it now, especially us, is it's an untapped fan base that may not be interested in traditional sports, that we have the opportunity to expose them to football, where previously they may not have even been interested in football. But if some of our players play some games that they're interested in and there's some crossover there, you kind of cross-pollinate, you get somebody involved on this end that may not traditionally have been involved, and vice versa. By Mr. Jones, owning a part of Complexity, and being in that world, you may expose some football traditional sports fans over to the esports world, and there's room for both. I think there's enough, there's enough hours in the day, the week, the month, where it works for both. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, where you're cross-pollinating fan bases, and especially now that guys are coming into the league and they've been gaming, and some of them are good enough to do it on a professional level. And we're starting to see a lot of that with some of the stuff that, GSN's doing and things like that across other leagues and other sports. So I think it just makes a lot of sense on a lot of different levels.
Kim, I'm curious your perspective coming from the agency.
Sure. So from my perspective, pretty much across the board, all of my football clients are gamers. In their free time, that's what they like to do. That's how they decompress, whether they're on the road or at home. So for me, to give them an opportunity to use that as a way to monetize themselves and also engage with a different fan base, which a little like Shannon was talking about, just traditional football fans may not be esports fans or vice versa. So to tap into that fan base of esports players and fans to help our clients just have a broader range of reach, then that's a great thing. And if they can make money playing in a tournament or with a brand that wouldn't traditionally be supporting a football player, again, that's a great thing. And it's a great service for our agency to provide, because it's completely, to this point, out of the box. It's usually the traditional endorsement deals with shoe brands, headphones, things of that nature. So now if we can get into an entirely different space and open up new opportunities to make money, do endorsements, brand themselves, that's music to my ears as an agent.
Yeah. And, I have a question to where it's, I want to ask you guys, how far can you push the boundary of traditional sports without hurting the product, right? So it's like, one would think you have the new offering for fans that could eventually draw attention away from the traditional product, right? The live game action. How do you guys just think of like weighing those two?
I'll jump in on this one. I don't know if they really hurt each other at all. I think the opposite. I think they feed each other quite a bit and quite well. Like Kim was saying, for us, it's very similar, and in some aspects even more important, because we're in MMA, we're considered a blood sport, as they call it, right? So there's a lot of brands who obviously have issues in some cases with what happens inside the cage or the octagon. And I think that the athletes are going to play regardless, and it does allow them to connect to their fan in a whole new way. And it allows the fan who would watch the fight or would watch the football game or would watch the basketball game, they're not going to stop watching that, right? They're going to continue to be a fan. They're going to continue to watch their sports. This is just a new way of taking in content that they want, right? I think we all want that new feed, that additional sort of inner view into what their world might be. And when you get to see them playing video games and talking and interacting, it's a new way to look at that athlete. And I think fans really enjoy that, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree totally with Keelan. I don't think that it hurts traditional sport. I mean, the reality is that, there are huge numbers that are watching gaming, watching esports. And I think, traditional sports and owners like Jerry, as we talked about, have identified that. And, instead of seeing that as a threat have embraced that. I think that's the right approach. It's really about this kind of integration and ways of, looking to integrate the two. And I think that's definitely, at Game Square, something that we really focus on, is that intersection between sports and gaming and esports. And to kind of Kim's point before, I think with Rock Nation and our partnership there, it's really interesting that this is actually a way for fans to engage and get to know athletes. Often athletes are performing, especially if you look at a sport like the NFL, they've got a helmet on, they're playing on a Sunday. Unless they're a quarterback or they're a superstar and they've had a huge game and they're getting a lot of media, you really don't get an opportunity to necessarily engage with those athletes as much. And gaming's a really good way of doing that. I mean, we've had a few tournaments lately where we've had with professional athletes who are really great gamers, and had a lot of fun with those. But it's been a really good way. I think Leonard Fournette's a really good example. Kim, who's obviously a client of Kim's. Lenny's got a great personality, and integrating him into some of these opportunities and tournaments has been a great way to show that to fans. So it's a great way for fans to actually, really engage with these athletes.
I'll add, sorry, Kim, just one more thing I'll add. In your world, Kim, I mean, in football, you don't get to see the athlete too.
Right.
So I think in gaming, that really brings them to life. It lets you see their face. It lets you interact that way.
Yeah, I mean, like Justin just said about Leonard Fournette, has a huge personality. He's hilarious. He's super competitive. I mean, you can't really convey that necessarily on the football field. The competitiveness, yes, but his humor, no. So given this opportunity to engage with fans by playing esports, it's created a different way of showcasing who Leonard is off the field, and people are learning more about him than otherwise would just through football.
Yeah, well, as far as athletes go, is this something they're doing organically, you would say, Kim, or is this more of an opportunity to monetize it, or, how do you kind of look at that?
It started very organically. Again, most of my clients game as a way to decompress. They find it relaxing. So they bring their gaming systems on the road with them. They bring them in the off season when they're training. I think that they just genuinely enjoy it. And now to take what was just a hobby, basically, and use it to, expand their platforms, make some more money, expand the fan base. It's a win-win for everybody.
With the explosion of NIL in the college sports space, how are you all seeing streaming gaming becoming a larger part of, your organizations and agencies?
I know for me, when we go out and pitch to college players for NIL, we've been pitching this partnership that we have with Justin's company, because it's something that a lot of agencies aren't providing. And again, across the board, the college players are just as interested, if not more so, in gaming, because I find the younger the client base, the bigger the gamer that they are. So it's just an added value for me to bring to the table to say, hey, we've got this esports department where you can actually monetize what you love to do when you're not playing football, which is gaming. And then it gives us an opportunity to brand you in that space as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look at the top 10 draft picks in every sport, right? And it's going to happen more and more every year moving forward. The agency world is pretty competitive in recruiting these athletes. I think for Rock Nation, like, what a step ahead that you have an agency there that can actually help, build content strategy, grow audience, monetize a space that, you're really interested in as a hobby. It really is. You look at these young athletes now and they really get it. I'm actually here in Vegas this weekend to spend some time with Sean O'Malley, who's fighting tomorrow night in the UFC. He's a really good example. I mean, if you have a look at some of the content he creates on YouTube, on Twitch, he gets it. He's actually monetizing. He's creating a brand and a new audience and monetizing. He's a really good example, but that's one of many. I think it's a really organic thing. These athletes, are gamers and they really enjoy it. I think if we can give them an avenue to grow a greater audience and to monetize, then that's hugely positive.
Yeah, would you say if you're an owner of a sports team, pro sports team, today, if you're not invested in esports or gaming, would you just say you're behind at this point, going into 22?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, right? I don't think you necessarily have to own an esports team, but I think you need to be invested in it in the way of understanding that, there are, a multitude of ways within this industry to reach audience and engage and use traditional sports to integrate. And if you're not looking at ways to do that, then absolutely, I think you're behind. This doesn't have to necessarily be I own an esports team and we're competing in Counter-Strike or Call of Duty and we're going to build the biggest and best team in the world, because, you know, as many people, you know, who look under the hood, many of these pure esports orgs are actually still burning a fair bit of money. I think, you know, there's a lot of future upside in that, in valuation and beyond. But the gaming industry as a whole, I mean, it really is about content. I think Keelah said it really well before. Content is king here, and this is a whole new avenue around content that can engage with a younger fan base. So from a traditional sports perspective, and again, kind of not to put Shannon on the spot, but to throw over to Shannon, I mean, this is the world that he lives in. I mean, you know, if you're not looking from a traditional sports you know, viewpoint at creating compelling content in space, I think you're a long way behind.
Yeah, I think from a pro team standpoint, you're always looking for your next generation of, you know, season ticket holder, your next generation of merch buyer. And, you know, a lot of your, we talked about earlier, your traditional sports fans and kids that were playing traditional sports, now they're watching others play video games. They're watching people play Call of Duty and Madden, and they're just as content watching them play these games as, you know, my generation was watching baseball and football and basketball on TV. So if you're like, you know, like Justin said, if you're not, you don't have to own an esports team, but if you're not thinking about how to engage what's going on, because this is a new sport, this will be one of the biggest sports across, and it's global. It's not just US based or Europe based. It's a global sport. If you're not thinking about how to tap into that and how to, you know, at least expose your sport to that generation and what they're doing, then I think, yeah, you absolutely are behind. And I think that's kind of what you're, you know, you don't want to convert them. You just want to expose them, I think, and show them like, hey, this is what else is out there. So I think you definitely need to be thinking that direction if you already aren't. And if you aren't already thinking that way, you're a little bit behind. So yes.
What ways can we expect the line between esports and traditional sports to continue to thin? Is it VR, or what other avenues come to mind?
You know, I'll jump in real quick, just from me, you know, running social media at the Cowboys and kind of I think what's traditionally been esports is changing. And I think because now you can see with what's happening in that space, these are content creators now. They're not just playing games. The thing, like Keelah said earlier, content is king, right? We're in the content business. Athletes are in the content business. Teams are in the content business. Gamers are now in the content business. They're becoming personalities, just like, you know, athletes have personalities. So I think where you're going to see the lines blur, at least as far as, you know, the lens that I look at it through, is creating content together. And, you know, you're going to have teams that create, like us, we're in a great situation with Complexity and you know, GSN, where we have access to, you know, gaming athletes. So there's going to be a lot of co-mingling with our personalities, their on-air personalities, and a lot of co-content creation. So from my point of view, it's creating content that we can get in front of their audience, and then content where we can get them in front of our audience. And then to me, at some point, there will be just this one big blur where it all kind of runs together and it's one big happy family, and we're really co-mingled and kind of part of each other's fiber.
Yeah, I totally agree with Shannon. I think people talk about this industry and even the kind of growth of traditional sports into gaming as something that's, you know, kind of matured, or, you know, when does it fall away? We are in such an early stage with the growth of this and of the integration into traditional sports. It's such an early stage. So we're going to continue to see it grow. We're going to continue to see, you know, game day activations. We're going to see tournaments hosted and played by, you know, major sporting teams. We're going to see gaming lounges at sporting, you know, arenas and all of those things. But it's really early days. So there's a huge evolution still to take place there. And to Shannon's point, I think the crossover is real, but there's still so much opportunity for real collaboration. I think, you know, we did an AT&T content piece at AT&T Stadium with Tim the Tap Man, who's one of the biggest gamers through my org at Complexity, with Ezekiel Elliott. And they were competing, playing video games on the massive screen at AT&T Stadium. And like, what an incredible moment. But there really are only a handful of those types of examples. So I think we'll start to see those become a little more mainstream. I think there's a huge amount of growth in that crossover of, not just about, hey, how do the Cowboys integrate gaming into, their ordinary course of business, but how do we cross collaborate our athletes and creators, as Shannon really said there.
I think you're gonna, just to answer a little further, I think you're gonna see VR. I think you're gonna see AR. I think in the NFTs and the whole sort of crypto and NFT community coming, that word I just said in the end, I think is really what it comes down to, is these communities that are being built and created around an athlete, around an esports player, and how do you bring those communities together to sort of build a stronger community and a more tight-knit group of people who all have the same passions and love all the same stuff, and all they want is, again, more content, but how do they take that content together, I think is this next phase that we're going to see. How do we do it together, especially with COVID and everything that happened, to kind of ripped everyone apart. Everyone really wants to be together again somehow. And I think these technologies are allowing for that.
As we know, to get into these, to take advantage of these communities, it takes investment. I wanted to ask you all, how do you quantify return on investment? Is it, what are the long-term and short-term revenue streams?
Yeah, so they vary probably across the group here for sure. From an esports org perspective, if you're running an esports org, your kind of financial models, pretty akin to a traditional sporting financial model, right? You have prize money and you're competing to win and bring in your major revenues through that. You have obviously your traditional sponsorships on jerseys, naming rights, events, tournaments, so forth. But I think building out, we keep going back to content, because gaming really is so much bigger than just esports. I think the opportunity for these content creators and streamers to really build large audience, engaged audience, to then be able to monetize and integrate brands through those content opportunities. That's really the key for an org in this space anyway. But what I'd say is, and you can even see this if you look at it from even just an investment thesis standpoint. This is less reliant today on being profitable or just a pure P&L standpoint. This is really about engaging these future fans, right? These fans of the future, and we're continuing to see these numbers increase. So I think you can also quantify by audience, by brand growth and engagement. But I think for all four of us on this Zoom are probably different metrics as to what makes gaming and esports investment successful.
Shannon, you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think did you say Shannon or Kim? I'll jump in anyway. Jump in, Shannon. I think Kim could go. I think I think we're just scratching the surface as far as like revenue streams. A couple that jump out to me are, I think you're going to see pro teams come up with some type of gaming leagues where, you sponsor tournaments, you have gaming tournaments, and you build kind of a database, kind of a gaming league. And then, long term, I think there's a lot of synergies and a lot of new revenue streams with partners that we currently have, that we can expose them to a new audience and a new demographic that they don't typically get with, traditional sports. With the Cowboys, it's a younger demographic. It's there's totally, new untapped kind of exposure there. So I think it allows us to cross over into, hey, not only can you do these types of sponsorship deals with the Cowboys, now we have this relationships with an esports org, and we have our own gaming league. And there's, new revenue streams possible there. And then, just the spirit of competition, if you're into sports or you're into esports, you like to compete. So I think in the future, and this is probably a little bit longer term, you're going to see our gaming league competing with the Washington football team's gaming league, because there's already built-in rivalries. And I think there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon that we haven't even begun to explore yet, because there's not enough pro teams, at least in the NFL, that are going down this road yet. But I think long-term, you're going to see some instant built-in rivalry stuff where there's competition, which is going to raise even, who knows, there may be, big fan summits of e-gaming at, like what Justin said, at sporting venues in the future, where you have a real life esports tournament going on at the same time you have a football game going on, or a precursor leading up to it. So I think really we just haven't even scratched the surface on as far as the different types of things you can do from additional revenue that doesn't really compete with traditional sports or what we're doing now as a team.
But do you think like this can help drive ticket sales for the Cowboys or merchandise sales, like, or do you think that remains separate, long term? Like, do you think it feeds into each other, or how does that?
I think the biggest way this feeds into that is, what we've kind of all been touching on here is the exposure. Like you may have a kid or even a grown-up that signs up for, we threw kind of a mock Fortnite tournament several weeks ago, just as a test run, and had a play-by-play and all that. There's a definite scenario where you integrate on-air personalities that are Cowboys personalities or Cowboys players into these tournaments that may not even be playing in the tournament, but they're on air during the event. And, people that are watching this, they're like, what, that Ezekiel Elliott's a really cool dude. I've never watched football before, but I might start watching now. And they automatically, because he was part of something they're interested in, if they're going to buy a jersey, they're going to go buy that guy's jersey. If they're going to watch a football game, they're going to go watch the Cowboys because Zeke piqued their interest. If they stumble across Leonard Fournette's, live stream on YouTube or wherever he's at, and they see him and he's a funny guy, guess what? They're going to go watch his football game. They're going to get interested just because they like him as a person. And I think that's where the content creation comes apart. That's where in the football world, we always say the helmet off experience is a lot better, because you don't see these guys on the field and you don't know how they are. I think, not directly maybe, but I think indirectly, absolutely, it exposes them to that access and that kind of curiosity to get them to take that extra step and learn about football.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to wrap up with this question here. How vital is it for athletes who are gamers to become influencers in the space, to push esports even more mainstream?
I think it's huge for the athletes, because they all realize that their playing life is relatively short-lived. And so they want to tee themselves up to be personalities outside of just the sport that they play. So this is one avenue to do that, to showcase who they are as a personality, and to give them something to do, again, the next chapter after the playing career is over. So I think it's a great avenue for our athletes to pursue while they're playing, and then for post-playing career as well.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the importance in the space, you touched on it well. I mean, it is important, right? I think in terms of, you saw in COVID, obviously the growth of the gaming industry and esports, particularly within that, was going north, but it was definitely fast-tracked through COVID by this halt in traditional sport. There was no other sport on, so ESPN was headlining esports tournaments. So it wasn't just these endemic brands and media. It was these traditional forms of media covering gaming and esports. And I think the athlete push has really helped commercialize this space. I think it's a really nice space for brands who probably don't, they understand that they need to be, have a gaming and esports strategy, but may not understand, the real value of a Tim the Tatman or somebody like that. But seeing an Ezekiel Elliott, who's a big gamer, it's a really sort of nice landing spot. It's like a soft landing spot for brands dipping their toe in the water in the industry as well. So I do think it's really important having the backing of, key athletes and celebrities in the space, and seeing their passion and their authenticity to gaming, which is also really important, because these communities can be quite fickle and they'll see through it really easily. So I think it's incredibly important.
I think you guys hit it in the head, Kim. What you said, especially, we try to teach our athletes and educate them all the time that the things outside of the sport that they're passionate about and that they do anyway are the things that they're going to continue to do throughout their lives. Becoming an influencer in those spaces simply opens doors for them. It gives them opportunities that they won't have if they don't do that while they have the spotlight on them playing professional sports. Not to say that esports isn't professional sports, it is, but that's not their core, right? What's really interesting is that it works one way, but not the other. You can't, a football player, a basketball player, MMA fighter, they can play esports. They can stream, they can play video games, they can join tournaments, they can try to professionalize more. But the chances of you having someone who plays video games deciding to go be a football player tomorrow, I would imagine they're pretty slim. So it's a really nice process for the athletes in professional sports to be able to go into the space and promote the space, which only helps them, right? So I think it's really, really important. We try to educate them on this stuff all the time. And that goes across several different areas, right? Like we said before, whether it's NFTs or esports or all sorts of different areas where they can have another life.
Shannon, you're right at the center of it. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I really couldn't say it better than anybody else. I think it's a great opportunity for athletes. And I think the unique partnership we have with GSN and Complexity allows us a very unique situation where, when we identify who these guys are, we're set up in the future to, set them up with, a relationship with, the best in the business to know how to do gaming setups. If they're interested in streaming, if they're interested in, creating content, we have right across the street from our facility, Justin and his team to help them, to help them set up whatever they want to do. And I think it's really important for, just like Keeley said, and Kim said it earlier, like, I don't think enough athletes think about what's next, especially when they're in the moment, because when you're in the moment, you're invincible. You're going to play football forever. And I think that the lifespan of a football player is about 3 years in the NFL. And you have a short amount of time to grab, like Keeley said, the spotlight while you have it, build your following, build what you're passionate about. And then that carries on for the rest of your life. And I think, as there's more and more guys coming into the league that are interested in gaming, we're going to see more and more of them kind of jump on this train where in the off season, you're building this brand. The football season, you're building your football brand. And a lot of them are going to get a lot more smarter business wise out of it, because I think this is something that they're going to want to do long term. And obviously the shelf life of a gamer is probably a lot longer than it is of a pro athlete. So there's, I think, the longevity of that. And also, from the agent side, you guys know this as well as anybody. There's additional revenue streams that are ongoing past football that you can engage in and that can help you, supplement your career and keep you going through life. So I think, those are kind of from the team side, and just seeing the athlete side, that's how it all kind of makes sense to me. So.
Well, hey, that brings us to the end of the session. You guys heard it here first. If you're not investing or, making strides, being forward thinking when it comes to esports and gaming, you're going to get left behind. So I appreciate you guys coming on today, and thank you for your time.
All right. And thank you for joining us, folks. Proud to be here right now with Zach and Naz, two people who know the esports industry and business better than almost anybody else. And guys, I want to start by making fun of myself, I think, a little bit. Last year, in about first couple of weeks of April 2020, at a previous job, I wrote a story about how a lengthy pandemic could be the accelerant for the esports industry, kind of working under the belief that although live events are obviously important in this industry as well, that the kind of endemic digital nature of esports was really going to set it up well for a time when people are both stuck at home and also traditional sports are maybe not playing as much. I don't think I was exactly right maybe about how that played out, but I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on what the last 18 months have meant for an industry that was growing and growing very quickly up until the pandemic.
Well, I guess I'll start. I mean, I saw both sides of that during the pandemic, coming from the traditional sports world and having a foot in esports with Team Liquid and our NBA 2K League team. I will say our 2K League team performed quite well. We won back-to-back trophies in 20 and 2021, playing all remote and then on stage in 21. Team Liquid also played very well, all the while our building was shuttered. We couldn't bring fans into our physical building. I'm calling you today from Capital One Arena. It feels great to be back, and fans have smiles on their faces when they're coming back into the building. We've had sold out houses again. There's nothing that beats it. But I really took that it was a silver lining that, demo of esports, usership of a lot of the platforms really did increase. And we also saw some overlap between the audiences too. The 2K League, for example, struck a deal with ESPN2 and got their championship game broadcasted on that when live sports were shut down. That was a great example where esports, I think, seized on that opportunity. But the larger esports world is also capitalizing on some of the other trends that have exploded during the pandemic, like NFTs and whatnot. Team Liquid, most notably, signed a significant deal with Coinbase. And cryptocurrency had been around prior to the pandemic, of course, but I don't think it had reached the relevancy that I think is sort of the mainstream pop culture way until the last 12 to 18 months. So I think what we took away from the pandemic is that clicks are in, bricks are coming back, but it really does pay to be in the clicks world. All of the FANG stocks were the ones that performed so well during the pandemic. And so we all want to transfer our business into being more clicks, and esports is perfectly positioned to continue to take advantage of that. Whenever we can try to lend some of our best practices from a brick and mortar perspective, we will. But we learn as much from esports as esports learns from traditional sports.
Yeah, I love the way you say that, Zach. We on our side, we live in a pretty much all click world, or click first world. I'll put it that way. We were, interestingly enough, one of the first sports leagues to be impacted by COVID because we operate a pretty big league out in China. So China being first hit, our league was first hit. And I give a lot of credit to our technology teams in our esports division. We were able to very quickly pivot from having a live audience and broadcast teams sitting in our arenas producing the shows, and pro players, of course, competing out of those arenas, to going completely online. And so I think we went offline for a couple weeks in China, quickly came back on to 100% virtual production, and then quickly essentially taught, right? We taught all of our other regions around the world how to do the same, and essentially we're able to get ahead of it. And since 2020, we've been pretty much virtual. And what I mean by that is there were periods of time, of course, we were completely virtual, meaning our pro players were also competing from the safety of their own homes. We've since been able to bring, depending on what region and territory we're talking about, we've been able to bring pro teams and our broadcast and production crews back on site. We've unfortunately not been able to have a live audience in our arenas yet. But we're certainly hopeful that 2022 will be the year that we can bring them back. I don't think anything substitutes or replaces the energy that a live audience can bring. We know our pro teams love to see it. We certainly feed off of it, so we do welcome that. But for us, our sport is viewed by tens of millions of people every event around the world. And so the majority of those viewers are viewing from home. So it's up to us to figure out how to optimize that viewing experience for those masses and not just the folks that are coming into the arenas.
From a financial standpoint, how important are live events to the esports ecosystems that both of you guys operate in? I think a lot of people still think of esports as being digital only, and obviously that's not true. But I'm curious how, from a business standpoint, how important those World Championship events that you guys have hosted and will continue to host, how important those are from kind of the balance sheet standpoint.
There's some revenue there. I would argue that it's definitely not as high as what you see in traditional sports. One, at least for League of Legends, we're not operating in city-based arenas, so that structure isn't there. We do have ticket revenue, but again, compared to traditional sports, a lot lower, less frequent live events. But we certainly make up for that in other areas, right? I think the digital revenue side of esports is the area that's particularly interesting from a revenue generation standpoint. There are other, non-ticket revenue considerations, right? When it comes to live events, sponsorships and on-site activations are certainly something that you do see at esports events. And so we've really pivoted these last 2 years to taking those activations virtual as well, and figuring out, again, with our partners, how can we give you digital real estate to replace kind of the physical real estate that you get from signage, and then how can we find ways for you to engage fans, not just those that are coming to the arenas, but all those that are watching, and that in fact gives those sponsors exponentially larger audiences to engage with than just those that are able to attend a live event.
I find the sponsors, go ahead, Zach.
I was going to say, just to add on to that, it's interesting when you think about the evolution of traditional sports. They started off going really deep, a mile deep on a grassroots level and in a local level. Games weren't even on television for a long time. The NBA's celebrating its 75th anniversary. The NHL is 100 years old. And finally, they grew their presence, and then they built national and then global platforms with global audiences and appeal. Esports didn't develop grassroots communities in geocentric locations. They developed them in chat rooms and different online formats. And then it quickly became a global platform, but it's not a mile deep. And so I've always thought that's something that esports could benefit as sort of the next generation of building team value, building league value, would be figuring out a way to go deeper locally and starting to build local events, whether it just be watch parties or eventually competitions, touring models and the like. And it's the reason why Team Liquid launched Liquid Plus. They wanted to get to know their customer. They don't want just high-level metrics on how many people are watching. They actually want to know who their fans are. They want to be a direct-to-consumer business. And that's something that I think traditional sports has done very well at, and esports has a huge opportunity to grow into in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would imagine that obviously the Wizards and the Capitals have a tremendous database of pretty much every sports fan in some capacity in the DMV area. Team Liquid, I would think, is again a much more global audience base. There's no kind of, at least not right now, any kind of specific geographic to dive into. How do you fix that? I mean, Naz, I also would love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, is there a world in which NALCS franchises are also geographically based, which I know some other parts of the esports ecosystem are trying? How do you kind of build keep the global, but also kind of dive into the regional?
Yeah, I think for us, what you'll see is it'll probably start from the next tier down from a like a competitive structure. And I'll point to Europe is a very good example of what we do there. So the LEC is the equivalent of the LCS. So it's our professional European league there. Beneath the LEC is, you could call it a developmental league called the European Regional Leagues, and they culminate in a European Masters. What that is really are their national leagues. So there's a French league, there's a German league, there's a Spanish league, et cetera, et cetera. And we see that very local fandom. Our French audience is really rooting for those teams. And then when those players, if and when they kind of get poached right by those LEC teams, that fandom follows. And so You're starting to see some of that local. It's not city-based for us yet at this time, but I do think as we continue to if you think of the competitive League of Legends, right, as a pyramid, and the pro players kind of the tip of the pyramid, as we continue to fill out what the rest of that pyramid looks like with colleges and high schools, then I think you're going to start to really see that local fandom develop. But I agree with excuse me, I agree with Zach. I think it's a really interesting area for esports to look into. And on the flip side for us is that our audience is so global. And so in a way, we want to balance this notion of, the audience is so borderless, the fandom's so borderless. So it's almost like, how do we continue to keep those borders down? Because it's incredible to have a North American audience rooting for a European team or a Chinese team or a Korean team and vice versa. That kind of gives our pro teams just this massive audience base to go get. But agree with Zach, you kind of want that balance of, your local fandom and your global heroes.
Zach, I'm curious, when you think about Team Liquid, how do you think about attracting new fans? For some ways, the Wizards and the Capitals, it's fairly easy. You have an area where a lot of people are born and they grow up rooting for the team that they can see on TV and that they can go watch in person. Is it a better content strategy? Is it the players that you're signing? How do you think about the way that a Team Liquid differentiates itself from all the other kind of without region esports brands out there?
I think the lines are getting blurred all over the place, and I think that's good for teams in esports and traditional sports. On the Team Liquid side, I think the reason why they've built a great fan base is not only because they've been successful on the rip, they've had successful teams, but they've competed across lots of different platforms, lots of different titles. They've got over a dozen teams, and as we know, every title has a very different fan base. A CSGO fan is very different from a League of Legends fan, and they have hotspots in different parts of the world. Rainbow Six, very popular in Brazil, for example, versus League of Legends or something, for example. So they definitely have different brands and sort of meanings to different geographic regions and different titles. But they are, I think, the common thread is an authenticity, is a level to treating athletes the right way. And I think that has really benefited Team Liquid. On the traditional sports side, sure, yeah, if you're living in Washington, D.C., you're likely to be a Capitals or a Wizards fan. But, we have Rui Hachimura playing for the Washington Wizards, and we're probably the most popular NBA team in Japan right now. And so, there are Premier League teams that American fans watch all the time. There are, Manchester United fans in Washington, D.C. And so that's what I mean in terms of blurring the lines. I think there's room for both of those things. But for Team Liquid, I think it's really developing a core thesis around what are our values, and then finding fans that really also embrace those values, winning being one of them.
How do you guys feel like the franchised esports model is working? Naz, I think in 2018 is when Riot Games kind of started along that path. It's a model that seems very clearly to be modeled in some ways after U.S. traditional sports. There's revenue sharing, there's minimum salaries, all of that. There were some diehards within esports communities, obviously, that were a little skeptical, felt like maybe it was kind of getting away from the more decentralized nature that esports had known for a while. But now that we're 3-4 years into the experiment, I'm curious how you feel like it is, how it's working out.
Yeah, we think it's working well. We, like you said, we franchised first the LCS, which is our North America League, back in 2018, fast followed with Europe and, now China, our Korean leagues, our Brazilian league, just at the end of 2020 franchised. So 2021 has been their first season. They're actually the only franchise sports league, I believe, in Brazil, which is kind of incredible to think about. Yeah. But, our lesson that we've really learned is that, not every game that we launch, not every region needs or should have a franchise model or kind of a permanent partner structure. For us, it's really, really critical to let the game's audience and the community around that game and that esport develop before we determine what the best long-term structure for a league is. And a great example, right, is that we've launched Valorant Esports, which is our tactical shooter game, and the esport is, you know, surpassing all our expectations this year. It's our inaugural season. But even though we've had success with League on the franchise side, we didn't jump the gun and immediately launch Valorant from a franchise position, again, because we really want the community to develop, and then we can see what structure is gonna make sense. There's certainly pros and cons, you know, to both. Franchise leagues obviously bring a lot of stability for teams, for their sponsors. It opens up the opportunity for teams to really invest, whether that's in infrastructure and players, et cetera, that they might not otherwise feel comfortable doing, understandably, right, without a permanent slot, and kind of knowing that they're going to have that platform and that exposure, you know, season in and season out. And of course, on the other hand, these open ecosystems, they promote a wider variety of teams and organizations and players, frankly, from getting to come in and try and dip their toes. You know, our fans, we get mixed reactions, admittedly, from fans. Back in the day, some fans didn't want to see the closed system. They liked a promotion relegation system. They wanted to see fresh blood coming in and out of the league. But I think, you know, fans are liking what they're seeing now. You know, again, they're building strong affinities for these teams, and the brands and teams, you know, Zach can talk about Team Liquid, are doing an incredible job of building those brands and, you know, building the profile of the stars that are on those teams, and really giving fans kind of a reason to love them and to follow the sport.
Yeah, Zach, I'd love to hear your kind of the investor side of that conversation. There's a reason why MLS teams are worth a lot more than English Premier League teams, and the main reason there is that they can't get relegated. There's obviously some stability to this model. I'm curious how you think about, you know, from where you sit, the difference between kind of investing in franchise esports versus some of these other titles and other leagues that are not the same structure.
Well, it certainly feels safer to own a franchise slot, and it's an easier way to build value because there's scarcity. There's only X number of slots available in a league. And, you know, I think when we think about being members of the leagues that we are in the NBA and the NHL, for example, or the W, you know, we compete on the court or the ice, but we're partners off it. And there's a lot of best practice sharing, and there's a scale that a league can come and represent on behalf of teams too. And that's where you get the NBA, you know, crafting a great national television partnership with ESPN and Turner, and driving national sponsorships while the teams are driving local deals and local media rights deals and whatnot. And so I think we're incredibly happy members of the NALCS, of course. It's probably not the right model for all esports. That's definitely the true. It should be for the top and most followed esports platforms out there. I think that the NALCS has come, you know, just a long way in terms of driving revenue. It's a really exciting time to be a part of the league. I would love to see more esports franchise. I think it would just add more stability and more organization. But again, it's not for every esport, and that's what keeps it interesting.
Naz, I don't know the breakdown for NALCS, but there are obviously teams that are controlled by groups like Monumental that have a ton of experience in that franchise model universe. There are other teams that still have ownership that kind of dates back to the earlier pre-franchise esports world. How different are your interactions with those groups? Are people telling you, you know, do one set of people want one thing and the other set? I'm just curious if your conversations are different depending on kind of what the background is of the ownership group of your franchises.
Yeah, you know, it's actually an aspect of franchising that we were probably most excited about on our end, which was infusing the league with this expertise and know-how, right, from the traditional sports world. And I think you can look at a number of examples across, you know, just the LCS of how the level of sophistication from a team operations standpoint, from how they manage their players, treat their players, et cetera, like that has just continued to elevate and escalate, I think, because of that expertise and knowledge that those ownership groups and investors have brought in. Honestly, for the LCS, and again, it's our North America League, I believe that every one of the 10 teams at this point has a professional sports organization or professional traditional sports athletes on their cap table. But, when you look at all these teams, I think, the dividing lines, right, among the ownership groups probably just comes from what their business focuses are. You have some teams that are really focused on building their brand. You see them doing these, amazing kind of merch collaborations. Others are focused on content creation. Others are launching ancillary businesses. And so for us, our North America commissioner always says that, when we franchised, we weren't looking for the 10 best partners. We were looking for the group of 10 best partners. And to Zach's point, like how they can all come together and elevate the league, learn from each other, we can learn from them, and vice versa. So, we're just really thrilled that all 10 of our teams in the LCS are really committed to growing the league and the fandom. And, that's always been the hope and the dream.
One of the things we do at Sportico is valuations for, at least so far, just for the traditional sports side. And Zach, you obviously, you know those numbers very well. NBA teams are appreciating very quickly. NHL teams are as well, maybe not quite as fast. I'm curious what you think about kind of esports, and we can maybe stay specifically in NALCS for the purpose of this discussion. But what do you think you're going to see, let's say 5 or 10 years from now, in terms of the appreciation for NALCS teams relative to NHL or NBA teams in your portfolio?
Well, I mean, when we first invested into Team Liquid, it was only generating $1.5 million. Now they're going to do, north of $50 million. They're driving revenues very quickly, and they are launching additional lines of business like, Naz alluded to. And I think that a lot of these teams are raising capital to potentially pursue M&A opportunities too, because they understand that these teams are platforms. A lot of people call Team Liquid just TL. We call it TLE for Team Liquid Enterprises. And we think there's, great advantage to being part of the Team Liquid platform, just like we have a platform here at Monumental. NBA teams and esports teams actually are valued kind of similarly, in the sense that they're valued on a multiple of revenue. It's typically 10x or higher. And so I think that's a credit to the growth trajectory that, those kind of leagues have. I don't see esports slowing down. Our goal was, we'd like to wake up one day and see Team Liquid be the same size and scale as one of our core properties, to be the same size as a Major 4 league. And when my father purchased the Capitals back in 2001, he purchased the Capitals for around $80 million. The team has appreciated significantly since then. But Team Liquid today is more valuable than the initial purchase price of the Capitals back then. So a lot can change. We think Team Liquid can be $1 billion plus enterprise one day.
How fast do you think that happens? I mean, if I were to tell you that in some year in the future, Team Liquid is worth as much as the Capitals, what year do you think that is?
I mean, I can't say that. You got me stumped there, but I don't think it's a pipe dream to say within a decade.
Interesting. Naz, how much do you think about valuations? Is that something that is hyper relevant in your job? Is it kind of an ancillary benefit of just the regular growth that you guys see on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis?
Yeah, we certainly want to think about ensuring that all the players, and I don't mean the pro players, all the players in our ecosystem, the teams, the pros, have the opportunity to thrive, right? That's the only way the sport can sustain. And we truly believe that this is a multi-generational sport. It's not going anywhere. We're going to be here decades from now. And so, we generally take a long view of building that value. Like, what can we do? What steps can we take to ensure that the ecosystem is in a good place where everybody, really can thrive? I always say that this has been, I'll say, LOL Esports 1.0. And I think that's kind of generation one, right? Even in terms of the audience who's tuning in. And it's going to be really interesting to see as we've gone into now our second decade, which by traditional sports standards does not sound like a long time, but by esports standards is the longest time. But as we do that, new generations are going to come in. I think the barriers to entry to the sport will continue to go down, even, in terms of, for us, we just launched League of Legends on mobile. That starts to make the game that much more accessible to people, and teaches the rules of the game to more. And so essentially my hope and my expectation is that fandom goes up, which is good for everybody, right? It's good for Team Liquid, it's good for the LCS, it's good for our global sport. And I think you're just going to continue to see that as more and more people kind of understand how the game is played, they're going to be able to enjoy the sport more and come into the fold.
What does Esports 2.0 look like?
So what I would say is, again, I think it's that next generation. I also think something that's going to be a focus of ours is how do we continue to build on how viewers and fans can experience the sport. I think we've really only started to scratch the surface. And I say we, I mean, as a full industry, not just Riot, but also Riot. When you think about what makes esports, I think, unique compared to traditional sports, it's that we have a built-in direct connection to the audience, right? And so if the NBA could directly connect to everybody who sits down on the couch and turns on a game, and you can start to customize, let's say, the content you serve them, you can reward them, you can engage with them directly, and also understand their consumption habits, that starts to become really interesting. And that's what we actually have in esports. It's obviously a responsibility we take very, very, very seriously, and would want to make sure that we wield it in a way that, again, only serves to amplify how people can experience our sport. But I do think that that's going to be probably kind of the next leap that esports makes as a whole.
Zach, you mentioned NFTs earlier. Certainly one of NFTs and crypto, I would say, is one of the kind of the biggest changes, kind of new additions to the sports and entertainment worlds in the past year or so. I'm curious how you think about, the adoption that you might see among different monumental properties for things, new technology like that, and whether Team Liquid and Warriors Gaming District are maybe a better place to start with some of those things than traditional sports teams that may have an older demographic that might not be as adaptive or adoptive of those technologies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it probably seemed far-fetched, just a couple of years ago to imagine that there'd be a couple of arenas in the NBA and that'd be named after crypto, platforms, but you got FTX Arena and Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles now. So it's real and it's definitely here to stay. I think that, what those companies are realizing is that there's great crossover between sports brands and a crypto audience. They're younger, they're affluent, they're interested in gamification, they're interested in taking some risks, they're interested in following market trends, they're highly educated. And so, esports is a great crossover with that. I think the esports audience is right in that same strike zone. Our leagues obviously have pretty defined frameworks on what teams can do. And I think that those frameworks always evolve over time. And they learn from different experimentations that happen in local markets. And so we pursued a pilot program for the Capitals and Wizards here last year, where we were selling some NFTs, Stanley Cup banners, virtual Stanley Cup championship rings and whatnot. And we had, we saw good adoption. It was a lot of fun. I think we're ready to take the next step. And, the league is going to help guide where that can go. We've obviously seen, huge success with NBA Top Shot. That market's cooled down. But clearly it showed a lot of value from our video rights that hadn't been tapped before. And so I would expect the league and teams to want to continue to double click on that moving forward in the future.
Naz, what is Riot Games looking at from a NFT, from a crypto in the blockchain world? What's kind of on your radar right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because obviously digital goods are
Endemic.
not new to, yes, not new to gaming, certainly not new to gamers. There's this whole notion of open and closed ecosystems, ours being one that's closed, that are goods that are in the game itself. But we've started to do some work with crypto exchanges from a sponsorship standpoint. So the LCS partners with FTX as an example. We haven't yet officially launched any League or Riot NFTs, but it's a space that we're looking at very closely and kind of assessing if and how we should or could get involved. For us, again, it just really kind of goes back to how do we do this in a way that feels good for the audience and adds value to them and doesn't negatively detract from how they want to experience the sport and showcase their fandom. So nothing to comment on NFT wise specifically yet, but something we're looking at.
We only have a few minutes left, but so I'll kind of end it on this, and I don't want to get your thoughts on it. I'm obviously pretty bullish on esports, and we talked earlier about the franchise model and ways in which kind of the esports world kind of shifted a little bit towards the traditional sports world. It seems to me like at some point soon the opposite's going to happen. That the idea of the disenfranchised consumers right now that are Gen Z and millennials and whatever's younger than Gen Z are soon going to become the dominant way that people consume. And in that world, esports becomes the thing that is kind of built directly for those consumption habits, right? So I'm curious if you guys think that at some point soon, and I'm sure there's little examples of this, but when we might start to see the traditional sports leagues really start to make changes that mirror kind of what's happening in esports as opposed to kind of the other way around.
Well, I think all leagues and teams and networks are thinking more and more about streaming these days, going direct to consumer. Mostly it's out of market packages or select national packages now. We'll have to see what happens to the future of local rights in a D2C world, but obviously being D2C is very important to traditional sports. I also think that esports has a layer of authenticity and access to players and talent that traditional sports doesn't totally have. I mean, we see lots of interviews with our players and our athletes across the traditional sports leagues, but you're not seeing a basketball player stream his basketball practice and talk to the audience and take questions and chat and whatnot, right?
We should, by the way, we should definitely say that. I'd love to see that in the future.
A credit to some of our players who have said, I think there are channels for me to express myself personally and have people get to understand my brand. And fans really rally around that, right? That's the content that fans really embrace and enjoy the most. And esports has nailed that kind of from the start. It's not cliched and it's just highly accessible. And so I think we will see a trend back to seeing a lot of our players wanting to brand build and make themselves more accessible to fan bases.
I mean, I could not agree more. I think those are excellent points. I think you're starting to see, point to the Manning's broadcast, right, of NFL games. That's
good example.
That's like, yeah, right. That's like co-streaming, and you see that being done in esports for many, many years, streaming in general, right? And so I think to your point, Evan, where for so long esports has been taking learnings from the traditional sports space. I don't know if that ever stops, but I think it's going to, esports, it's so technologically advanced and it's reaching this younger and younger demographic so effectively that traditional sports are going to start to look at esports for those learnings. We like to say that we are the future of sports. I stand by that firmly. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, as that continues, I will continue to look to both of you to help me understand those changes. Naz, Zach, thank you very much for joining us. This was fun.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. In early 2022, we'll have our licensing, growth, and innovation event taking place on February 24th. Please keep an eye on sportico.com for more information. In March, we are delighted to be at South by Southwest hosting the South by Southwest Sports Summit Please keep an eye on both sportico.com and southbysouthwest.com for more information. Don't forget, Sportico is a subscription service. We think of ourselves as a community of thought leaders, and we would love for you to join the family. Thanks again for joining us. We wish everyone a happy and safe and healthy holidays, and we'll see you in 2022. Thanks so much.